Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, maybe for some. We are going to start the webinar in a minute. Just bear with us as we still have 1 more minute to go. So we're just going to give a few more colleagues a little chance to join in, and then we will get started. Alrighty, colleagues. Well, let's start then. Like I said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to all of you to today's webinar on fleet emissions, the key terms that you need to know. My name is Nikita Udwani, and for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be walking you through this topic. We recently, there we go. I see Mohammed is already introducing himself. Lovely to see you. Not see, not hear, but at least experience your presence. Yes. Um, if this is your first webinar with Freeform, maybe just a few yeah housekeeping rules, shall we call it that? We try to make it as interactive as possible. We recognize it's a webinar, there's limited interaction, but still, we try to make it as much as possible a community session where we connect also with each other. So feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself. You can do that by exactly how you see Jeremy doing as well, your name, the organization, and the country that you are listening in from today. It's how you might have, if you are a regular attendee, then you might have noticed as well that we have now recently moved our webinars to Teams. Um, I don't make any promises, but what we are trying to do right now as we speak, my colleague is supporting me to see if we can activate live transcriptions of this meeting, and that means that if you speak French or Spanish or any other language that's not English, and you would prefer to listen to not listen, sorry, but follow this webinar in Spanish, then we are working on having live captions in your language of choice. But just bear with me for a few seconds as we see if that's a possibility for today. We're always, trying new technology. In the meantime, there we go. I see Rose is right on time. So, colleagues, if you speak any other language than English, you would be doing me a big favor as well and helping me out test out this technology. What we're trying to do is, like I said, as part of our strategy in Fleetform, we want to make our webinars more inclusive, not only running them in English, but we're also a small organization, so we need to manage our costs. So we're testing out this new tool called Wordly. If it's something you would like to try out, either because you would prefer to follow me in a different language, or because you are a nice colleague and say, "Hey, Nikita, I will help you test this out." Feel free to click on the link, the Wordly link that's in the chat at the moment. It will open in another browser, and you will be asked to select the language of your choosing. So, step one, click on the link. It'll open in your browser. Step two, click the language that you would like to follow me in. And then step three, what you will see is the bonjour, even Jeremy. The browser will open up and it will start translating me in the language that you have chosen. It's not so convenient as yet that it's not embedding it in Teams, but if you are a little bit tech savvy or if you have two screens, you'll be able to sort of place the two next to each other. Then you can see me, you can see my slides, and you can also follow the captions. So if you are successful in doing this, let us know. Feel free to tell us what you think of the quality of the translation. If you like this feature, it's something that if it's working properly, we are going to actively communicate this more through our member community, through our global focal points in membership organizations, so we can start also reaching more colleagues in different languages. So, enough about the technical side. Let's go into the topic at hand: fleet emissions, the key terms you need to know. So, I'm guessing if you join the webinar today, you are probably working in fleet or in logistics, and your organization is starting or is already taking sustainability seriously, and you have said, let me join this webinar, let me learn some more sustainability terms, let me brush up my knowledge. So let's go. You might have noticed already, um, if you haven't, I would like to emphasize this. Last year, October, we made a big step up as the Fleet Forum community. Many member organizations of Fleet Forum came together, and they really, I would say, made a strong commitment. You know, many of our organizations have commitments around sustainability, but what does it really mean for fleet management? So, Fleet Forum members came together, and they made some strong commitments. And the one I will be focusing on today is specifically the baseline and the targets part, where our members have said, this is the year we are going to have a baseline and an emission target for the largest fleets in our organization. So today's session, we are going to be talking about some key terms related to sustainability, and more specifically to sustainable fleet. The the first one I would like to take you through is called the Avoid, Shift, Improve framework. You will see me and other colleagues in Fleet Forum continuously emphasize this framework, because what we want to show you in this framework is that as you start to look at sustainability and what actions you can take as a fleet manager, yes, we encourage you to try multiple approaches, of course, but it should, as much as possible, you should work your way from left to right. You might have heard us say things like the cleanest kilometers are the ones that are not driven. So, of course, we encourage you also to test out different alternative vehicle technologies, like, for example, electric or hybrid vehicles. But what's even better than that is if you didn't drive those kilometers, if you avoided those kilometers altogether. So the first term that I'm introducing to you today is the ASI framework, the Avoid, Shift, Improve framework. Like I said, you'll keep hearing this popping up in our webinars. We won't go into each of the different initiatives around this. The key thing I want you to think about is to use this framework when you are starting to create your sustainable fleet approach, and to work your way from left to right. Let's also talk about carbon neutral versus net zero. Now, before I um, tell you more about this, let me test you. Um, those of you whose organization has a sustainability commitment, I'm not even talking about a fleet commitment, just a sustainability, an environmental sustainability commitment. Do you know if your organization has set a carbon neutral uh, commitment or a net zero commitment? Can you please use the chat box to share? So I'm looking for three possible answers here. Carbon neutral, net zero. I don't know, Nikita. And I know you'll know how the chat box works, because I see lots of hellos and introductions. So both. Oh, okay. That's maybe another category. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Okay. Um, carbon neutral. Okay. I don't know. Miguyu, that's maybe time to do some Googling. I don't know which organization you're from. Time to check. This is also part of, this is not a naming and shaming session, our colleagues. It's to also get you to think, oh my gosh, I'm the fleet manager. I care about sustainability. That means I have to think also broader than my fleet function, and understand how my organization is committing to sustainability, right? Tesfa, you say net zero. Okay. So we have some, I don't know, we have both. We have some net zero, some more carbon neutral. So allow me to walk you through the differences, right? Um, I am try. Okay, yes, okay, try it. Yes. Um, if anybody's experiencing this is like the old school, when in doubt, unplug and replug. What I mean by this is, feel free to step out and step back in, right? There we go. And hopefully it works. So let's talk about the differences between carbon neutral and net zero. Carbon neutral, by definition, when an organization commits to this, what we are saying is neutral. So think balancing in a way. When an organization or a company makes a commitment to be carbon neutral, what we are saying in essence is that the organization is going to it's going to understand what its emissions are, and it is going to balance it out with offsetting or carbon removal approaches. And so carbon removal could be like the organization saying, I'm going to invest in I'm going to plant trees, I'm going to purchase carbon credits. So like I said here, carbon neutral, the focus is on balancing carbon emissions, not necessarily reducing them. Now, net zero is committing, when an organization commits to net zero, they are taking a more, dare I say, comprehensive approach, where they are not only saying that they're going to balance their carbon emissions, but they are also going to reduce these to make them as close to zero as possible. And then the emissions that cannot be reduced, then they are going to eliminate those through offsetting. So this commitment it's also broader, and it includes all greenhouse gases, not just carbon dioxide. So in a way, net zero is more comprehensive. We can maybe use this picture if you are a bit more not mathematical, but yes, if you are more into visuals, perhaps this helps you illustrate, gives you a good illustration, right? Um, I see, Carl, you are becoming more acquainted with with FAO's commitment or and how comprehensive it is, right? And colleagues, like I said, not a naming and shaming session, but it's good to understand how your commitment or your passion for fleet and sustainable fleet is also sitting in your broader organization, right? So if we look at this graph, what you're seeing here is carbon reduction is all the actions that we take to reduce our our carbon emissions. So that's what you see in the these are like the actions in green, and this can mean using less energy. It can also mean and that's reduction. Huh? Now I'm introducing you to two other terms. We've just talked about carbon neutral and net zero, but now I also want to introduce you to carbon reduction and carbon removal. And here, what I would like to emphasize is um, carbon reduction. It's about the actions that you take to reduce your emissions. Carbon removal, that's what you're seeing in blue. These are the actions that you take one step further, and you think about how to remove CO2 emissions. Um, uh, to and take them out of the atmosphere. So that's like planting trees, but also storing carbon emissions. There's a number of different technologies around this. As this is not so fleet specific, I won't go into the details of it today. But if it's a topic you're interested in, I'd really encourage you to take a look also at the differences between like and to do some research around carbon removal. Let's talk maybe a little bit about the ambition, right? Between the differences in ambition between carbon neutrality and net zero. So, like I was pointing out before, right? Carbon neutrality means it allows for emissions to be created with no specified level of reduction. So I encourage you to check what how your organization is looking at whether they are making a commitment towards carbon neutrality or net zero. It doesn't mean that you cannot make a more ambitious commitment towards on the fleet side, but it is for you to take it into consideration. Net zero means that we reduce, we use all the available technologies to first reduce, and only the hard to decarbonize emissions are the ones that we compensate. Let's continue. In terms of scope, carbon neutrality, maybe this is one more difference to think about as well. A carbon neutrality must cover scope 1 and 2 emissions. And if you could make a choice to be carbon neutral and also include scope 3, but 1 and 2 is a must. Net zero must cover all three scopes of emissions. And that leads me to my next topic for today. Let me hop over two topics, right? But let's talk about scope 1, 2, and 3. I have a question for y'all in the chat. if you have a baseline for your fleet emissions, can you let me know if it's covering scope one and two, or one, two, and three? I repeat, if you have a baseline for your fleet emissions, is it covering scope one and two, or scope one, two, three? Either my internet is very slow or you all are very slow. One of the two. Ah, there we go. Sam, first one. One and two, but not three. Hey, there we go. We are looking. Kieran Kier, leading by example. Hallelujah. Okay, scope one. Colleagues, those of you who are our trainees and you are saying scope one, I'm going to encourage you to start reusing the Clean Fleet toolkits, my dears. Let's take a look, right? So scope one, two, and three. Here, what we talk about is scope. So this is, to be clear, colleagues, these terms are not specific to fleet, but I'm going to make them specific. I'm going to focus on the fleet part today, right? So when we talk about scope one, two, or three, we are talking about greenhouse gas emissions and specifically carbon dioxide, right? What I want to show you over here is that scope one, these are direct emissions. So they come either from your organization's owned, um, or it can also be your rental fleet. But in essence, it is about it is related to the emissions that are coming out from the tailpipe, which means that these are emissions related to the fuel consumption of your vehicles. And it's really, and when I say fuel consumption, please note, I did not say energy consumption. Means those of you who are operating electric vehicles or plug-in hybrid vehicles, it's not counting the electricity or energy consumption. This is really about what's coming out from the tailpipe. Then we talk about scope two emissions. These are indirect emissions that come from purchased sources, such as your organization's consumed electricity or cooling. And so here is where we get into, if we talk about fleet emissions, here we are talking about emissions also related to the charging of our vehicles. So any of your, if you are using hybrid or electric vehicles and the electricity the energy that the vehicles are consuming, this becomes part of your scope two emissions. This is slightly indirect emissions. And then we have also indirect emissions scope three. These are the ones that they are within your value chain. You are not directly purchasing them. It's counting your upstream supply chain emissions, but which is related to your suppliers, but also your downstream emissions. And this is quite a wide area if we think about it in terms of fleet, because it includes the production of the vehicle, it includes the disposal of the vehicle, it includes the emissions that your suppliers, so think like your vehicle and maintenance suppliers, think about your fleet, your vehicle insurance provider, there are emissions related to that. Think about waste management. That's a topic we discuss a lot in this community as well. It's about commuting of your staff. That's also a fleet emission, because staff are coming to the office, right? They're the trigger for the to be at the office is really that it's your organization that is triggering that. So commuting emissions are also part of this of this scope. So there's quite a number of different yeah, emissions in this category. Not the easiest category to quantify, I agree with you, but certainly not impossible. So those of you who have said scope one, if you are interested in this topic, and I think you are, you're dedicating 30 minutes of it of your time today, I would really encourage you to try to give it a go in the Clean Fleet Toolkit to make also an estimation of what your scope two and scope three emissions are. Similarly, if you have listened into some of our webinars around electric vehicles and the research that we're doing around this, you will know. I think in the fleet community, sometimes we all have a lot of opinions around. Oh, but the benefits are this and the drawbacks are this. But Fleet Forum, and together with a number of different members, um, like ICRC, like WHO, like CRS. We have been piloting electric vehicles in the Middle East and Africa, and I bring it up right now because I want to emphasize that another term that we talk about also, and you will see this more and more in donor proposals and so forth related to fleet, is what we call the life cycle assessment of a vehicle, where I think traditionally or donors ask us do a TCO, a cost based, a total cost of ownership comparison, right, between our vehicles and look for the most economical options. More and more in this fleet community, we don't have the tools maybe already to do a life cycle assessment ourselves, but we need to become familiar with these terms and gradually also build up our expertise to look at the full life cycle, meaning to the vehicle from the beginning, from its production, from the generation of the raw materials used to produce a vehicle unto its end of life recycling and disposal, and to also use that as a factor to determine the types of vehicles we procure or we operate, we source. So this is the picture I also wanted to pick. It's related to scope one, scope two, scope three in a way. And I wanted to give you an overall view of your emissions, but also zooming in to think about the life cycle of a vehicle and to also start preparing yourself that gradually in the months to come, we will work through in this community, also talk more about life cycle assessments, the differences between the LCAs, as we nickname here, some acronyms for our fleet managers, on how to and to understand the LCAs of different vehicles, different vehicle types, and to use that also to make more informed decisions. Last topic I want to cover, I think, in terms of emission target setting. Let me go back and see then. Let me do a little bit of a test first. Colleagues, those of you who say my organization has a target on fleet emissions, do you know what type of target is it? Is it a activity-based target? Is it an absolute target? Is it an intensity-based target? And if you say, Nikita, I have no clue, then you can also use the chat box to share what is your target for fleet emission reductions. And then maybe together we help you out in determining what is the type. And that way you become more familiar with the terms as well. So to repeat, my question is, if you have a target, do you know what type of target is it? And if you say, I don't know what type it is, then share in the chat what is your target. There we go. I see a colleague already is saying, all right, there we go. Yes, absolute target, 50% reduction by 2030. Okay, okay. Can I hear some more colleagues, please? If you say, Nikita, I don't have a target, don't feel embarrassed. You can also say in the chat, I don't have a target. I'm working on it. Safety and security for staff, Hazem. We are in the environmental sustainability webinar, so I'm looking for a sustainable fleet target. Safety and security also important, don't get me wrong, but today's session is on sustainability. Richard says, I don't know. Okay, good. Honesty is the best policy. Achieving a 45% reduction in total. Okay, okay. Not officially, but we aim to replace fuel with electric vehicles. Okay, let me start. This already gives me something to work with, right? Let me walk you through um the different types of targets you can set, right? And there's pros and cons to everything, of course. Let's first look at the absolute emission reduction target. I believe Farai was the one who mentioned that one. Here is where we say this is about setting a goal where you are going to reduce your emissions by a specific amount or a percentage, and you sort of say from this year to that year we are going to, so this is an absolute. And that's where I think I could be wrong, but I think Farai mentioned it, but also Carl in a way to say, okay, we are, well, Carl's is missing from which year, so maybe that one is worth looking into, Carl. But it's a clear description of we are going to reduce our emissions by X%. And I see a year has popped up as well. Perfect. Considering this is our baseline year, we are going to reduce by X% in this year. And this in essence is saying is, hey, even if our organization grows in terms of activities, in terms of what, I don't know, budget, whatever you want to call it. Point is, the organization is going to absolutely reduce its emissions. Then we have intensity based targets. Mm, Here, what we say is you can set a target, but related to a specific metric. And I think some colleagues had some examples of that, if I recall correctly. I saw one. Where did I see it? Mm, I'll come back to it, right? But here, what we say is we are going to reduce the CO2 emissions by, and we take a certain metric. It can be per vehicle, it can be per kilometer driven. So these are some examples, right? And here, what it allows for is that your organization number of vehicles might grow because I don't know, the activities increase or because there's more staff or whatever it may be, but you are focusing on reducing the emissions relative to that specific metric. So, on the one hand, you account for growth. On the other hand, I think some of the critics around this is that this is not really, not that it's not ambitious, but it's not as ambitious. Let's put it that way, because it's not committing to an absolute reduction. We talk about the climate agreement, the Paris Agreement. We talk about um, the IPCC reports that come out saying the world is on fire, and then setting this type of target could also give the impression we don't take this very seriously, right? It's like, yeah, but our organized activities are still growing. If you set an absolute target, you are saying even with growth, we are going to think of deeper, more transformational ways to reduce our emissions. And then comes the last one, an activity-based target. And I think this is where I saw some colleagues say fuel savings or transitioning the fleet to X% of other types of vehicles like hybrid or electric vehicles. So here you pick out specific activities in relation to your fleet, and you are setting some clear targets on the implementation of these. Here too, there are some benefits to this. It allows you to be very specific about what are the actions and are you actually achieving those different initiatives and is it taking you to your certain output. But indeed, it does not say anything about absolute emission reduction or even about intensity in that sense, right? So these are the three terms I wanted to bring across to you today. I've been doing a lot of the talking. Let me pause and see if we have questions and comments for the remaining 5 minutes. Could you please tell us the ideal fuel? Can I tell you the ideal fuel? So I think you mentioned sorry, the CO2 emission levels for each type of fuel, right? So I could be wrong. Don't, but no, I don't think I'm wrong. What I want to point out here, Tesfa, I think is it's not so much about the CO2 emission levels for each type of fuel, but I think here what I would focus on more is how the reduction of fuel consumption altogether and how can you how can you reduce that? Because normally when we are looking at like the CO2 emission levels, we have like an indication, right? We have an estimation, a scientific estimation, but we don't have where we are measuring what are the actual emissions from the fuel. So we are always encouraging organizations measure your fuel consumption, measure your kilometers driven. Those are the types of things that can assist you with getting an insight into your fleet emissions. Um, and that might be more helpful as well. Let me see another question. Can you relate the vehicle Euro emission classification to the emissions, please? I don't have it in front of me here right now, Jeremy. I'm so sorry. But yes, we have this table that I'm going to make sure I share it with you after this and maybe with other colleagues as well, where there is an indication of, okay, if a vehicle is of a certain Euro emission standard, this tends to be like the emissions, the estimated emissions related to it. I'm going to pull up that table. Yeah. More questions? We still have 2 more minutes, colleagues. It's always nice to have some questions, and I would like to hope that if you listen to me for 20 something minutes, I also triggered you to think about some things and maybe also gave you some questions or also some remarks. Um, I heard you, Sanam. Yep, would love to have the Euro classification table on it. We actually did a session also specifically on you on the Euro emission standards and the equivalents because the Euro emission standards is widely recognized, but there are also other equivalents. I think in the U.S., in Japan, and a few more in some other countries as well. I'm gonna make sure as part of in the email we send out today, we also link you to that webinar in case you haven't seen it. I think we are running. Last one. You meant the optimal level of CO2 emissions. Indeed, that's fine. So that's what I was saying, right? My suggestion would be for like each vehicle category that you set like what is the optimal fuel consumption range for that. Um, and then that sort of links into like the CO2 emissions. What we are normally doing is saying, okay, I think for depending on whether it's petrol or diesel, I don't remember the exact emission factor, but there's a differentiation over there. So we have emission factors depending on the type of fuel, and I can share that with you. Of course, it's not Fleetform who's measured it, but we're using it based on international standards of, and I'll share that with you. If you're looking to see how can I reduce my CO2 emissions, I think as a fleet manager, what we recommend to you is make it part of your monthly reporting to set some thresholds and ranges on what is the optimal fuel consumption, looking at the different vehicle types. And in the data collection tool that we have on the knowledge platform, we have some overall recommendations on the optimal thresholds. I think you should look at that and then also check with some colleagues in Ethiopia what is the range considering the local context, the road conditions, and then from there set some thresholds on your fuel consumption. We are running out of time. Last thing I wanted to say to you is a big thank you for joining today. We have a webinar on the 22nd of May on vehicle sharing. How can you introduce this in your context? Feel free to rate the webinar. My colleague Rose has just left the link in the chat. Please do feel free to rate this. It always gives us some feedback on the topics you like or don't like as well. And if you have any feedback on the AI-powered live transcription that you maybe listened to today, feel free to drop me a note or any colleague in Fleet Forum a note about this afterwards. Thank you so much. Have a great day. We will share the recording and also the links we discussed. Bye bye. Thank you.